Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at 2 Samuel chapters 5 through 10 in our continuing study of the historical books. 2 Samuel chapter 5, starting in verse 4, David was 30 years old when he became king and reigned 40 years. So that's going to bring him up to 70. Verse 5, at Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. That was when Judah had called him to be their king slash tribal leader. And now we read, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. Now, as Israel now recognizes David as king, the question is going to be where to place his capital. Will it be somewhere in Judah? He's been at Hebron, which is right in the middle of Judah, or will it be somewhere else? No matter where he goes, he's sort of going to be playing favorites. The place is going to be in somebody's territory, but there was one city that wasn't in anyone's territory. It had stayed independent, and that's the city of Jerusalem. It's a little bit like the place where I was born, Washington, D.C. The reason it's called D.C. in the Washington is because it's the District of Columbia. It's wedged in between Virginia and Maryland, but it isn't actually in any state of the United States. Jerusalem was like that. And so, chapter 5, verse 6, now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites. Now, the Jebusites had been mentioned, Jerusalem had been mentioned going all the way back to the days of Melchizedek. Genesis chapter 14, there had been a priest king there by the name of Melchizedek who had spoken with Abraham and had exchanged blessings. Um, Genesis 22:2 talks about the land of Moriah, and that's, again, around this area of Jerusalem, very, very close by. Adonizedek, when Joshua first came into the land, had been the king of Jerusalem. He had been against the people of Israel. So notice that Zedek ending to his name, just like Melchizedek. But he was not he was not righteous, and he wasn't on the side of the people of God. Uh, we read in Judges chapter 1, verse 21, that it could not be captured by Benjamin. It was bordered on their territory, but it remained independent. And finally, Jebus was referenced in that story of the concubine and the Levite, a very bad story. And remember, they had been going home, and he had said, maybe we'll spend the night in Jebus. And his servant said, no, no, that's a bad place. Bad things can happen there. So there hadn't been a good history with Jerusalem as of yet. Now, what we're looking at here is a topographical map of the area around Jerusalem. Notice the dark line. That's the modern Crusader walls. When I say Crusader walls, built by the Crusaders, or maybe a little bit later. But those walls you'll see if they're standing, and then you can see on the right the outline of the Dome of the Rock and the platform on which it stands. Now, ancient Jerusalem, going back to David's day, was this area, sort of a ridge that goes south from the old Temple Mount. The rest of Jerusalem hadn't been built yet. It was either farmland or just wild land, but probably mostly used for farming. So this ridge was the old city. If you want a do-it-yourself map of Jerusalem, just take your right hand and point it with the fingers down, and notice your thumb becomes the old city, what we're going to call David's city. And then notice you have you have a valley to the east. That's the Kidron Valley, and then it stretches all the way around the south and to the west side of the city, where it becomes known as the Hinnom Valley. And then there's this narrow place between your fingers and your thumb. Later on, that would get the name the Tyropoeon Valley, which means the Valley of the Cheesemakers. But that's not going to be until New Testament times. Now, here's a artist's conception of what the city looked like in that old day. Now, this is showing Solomon's temple in the north. It wasn't there yet because the Canaanites didn't. They had just a threshing floor, maybe some people growing grain. Remember, a threshing floor is a big high place where you just take the grain and you grind it, and then you throw it up into the air so that the chaff will blow away because of the high wind up there. And so this was a city that was surrounded on three sides. Actually, now, just recently, we have found archaeological hints that there was a moat, a trench on the north side of the city there, just before you get to that very high place, where they had cut an artificial trench to make it where it was surrounded not on 3 sides, but on 4 sides by this steep ravine. And so the city was considered virtually impregnable. Chapter 5, verse 6. Now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, and they said to David, this is the inhabitants saying this, the Jebusites saying this, you shall not come here, but the blind and lame will turn you away. Not saying that they were all blind and lame, but even if we were all blind and lame, we'd be able to resist your attack. And they were thinking David cannot enter here. And so these are the Jebusites with this idea. The Jebusites is one of the branches of the Canaanites. And so they say this. And David on that day said, whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him reach the lame and the blind, using their same charge, who were hated by David's soul, through the water tunnel. Now, this is only part of one verse that makes reference to the water tunnel. Sure enough, there is a water tunnel that has since been discovered that went underneath the city walls. You see, Jerusalem itself, if you're inside the city, there was no way to get water. And so someone back in the Jebusite period had dug a sort of a tunnel underneath the city walls out to a natural spring, the Gihon Spring, so that you could go down there or maybe drop a bucket if the water was high enough and get water from the spring. Was discovered in 1867. Captain Charles Warren had been reading his Bible and he saw this one line about the water spring, and he went looking for it. Sure enough, it was there. Made the climb up to the top. Actually, back in his day, it was a good feat of industrial climbing, rock climbing. Go there today, they put in this nice stairway, so you don't have to do the climbing on your fingertips and toes. You can just walk right up and down that same tunnel. But you can still go under the wall even today. Verse 9, so David lived in the stronghold. Now that term stronghold we're going to see that a lot for a few different places. The term here is Matsuda. You've heard of maybe Masada. It's the same basic word, means the stronghold. But whenever you see it, it's not necessarily going to be the Masada that you know about on the shores of the Dead Sea. So apparently there was a stronghold that was here and called it the City of David. And so that's going to be a term for Jerusalem. And David built all around the Millo and inward. Notice our translators weren't quite sure what to do with this word Millo, so they just left it. They didn't change it. It comes from Malah, which means to fill. So if they dug that trench, perhaps this is where they took the things that they had dug out of the trench and made maybe a big mound, and that's what archaeologists believe was the case today, and they believe they may have found remnants of that. Verse 11, then Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David with cedar trees and carpenters and stonemasons, and they built a house for David. So David now is going to be king of this entire area, both Judah and Israel. Right now we're just going to call it Israel together. After the death of Solomon, it's going to divide again, and we'll be back to calling it Israel and Judah. But David notice how he's got a good relationship with the Phoenician king of Tyre. They're not working at cross purposes. Tyre, they have an ocean-going, almost you could probably call it an empire by now. Trade routes all over the Mediterranean. David probably doesn't even have a rowboat. he's not based on the ocean. So they have very, very different interests. And in this case, they're actually working together. Now, in chapters 1 through 3, the previous section, we saw David being anointed. We saw him defeating Israel in the I'm not calling it the northern kingdom, but Judah versus Israel. David came out as the victor. And then there was a reference in the early part of chapter 3 to children being born to David while he was in Hebron. It's sort of a summary statement. And now, as we come to chapter 5, we see David again being anointed, this time by the northern tribes who recognize his kingship now. He takes Jerusalem. That's the military action where he has not defeat but success. And again we read that children are born to David, but this time it's a listing of the children that are born to him as he is in Jerusalem. Verse 17, when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines went to seek out David, and when David heard of it, he went down to the stronghold. And again, stronghold in this case is probably the stronghold in Jerusalem. That's what they were calling Jerusalem. Now the Philistines came and spread themselves out in the valley of Rephaim. You've had a number of references to Rephaim earlier in the Old Testament, and the last one was given in the book of Joshua when we read that the valley of Rephaim, the west end, the end of that valley, intersected, or at least almost intersected, with the with one of the valleys that's just surrounding Jerusalem, with the valley of Hinnom. That Hinnom, I'm not sure if they actually connect or you have to cross over the rise from one valley into the next, but they're coming up against Jerusalem. Then David inquired of the Lord. Again, I like the repetition of that phrase, saying, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand. Notice he asked the Lord, here's my plan. Is that what I should do? And God said, go for it. So David came to Baal Perazim and defeated them there. And he said, the Lord has broken through before me, like the breakthrough. That's the word Perez. So Perazim would just be the plural. The breakthrough is plural. Therefore, he named that place Baal Perazim. And so it gets that name. We're going to see that name. We're going to see that Perez used in a variety of ways. Now, the Philistines came up once again. They had been defeated. And so now they regroup, and they're going to come again out in the valley of Rephaim. When David inquired of the Lord, and notice he checks with God first. He doesn't say, oh, I already did this. I've got this covered. He said, this is God saying, you shall not go directly up. So God gives him different marching orders this time. Circle around behind them and come at them in front of the balsam tree. Now, I'm not sure what the balsam tree was, but apparently there was a grove somewhere that David knew about. It shall be when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then you shall act promptly, for then the Lord will have gone out before you to strike the army of the Philistines. Now, again, I'm not that familiar with balsam trees, but it reminds me a little bit. There's this place in Philippi, maybe completely different kinds of trees, but the trees there out by the river, the leaves in the trees have this curious. They're sort of cupped, almost as if to form a natural. I'm going to say whistle, but it's not a whistling sound. But when the wind blows through them, there's this real. You can actually hear it, not lightly, but it's almost like a musical instrument. um, and I think what was happening was here too, something like that, where the wind would blow through, and it almost sounded like somebody marching or something like that. And you're going to take that as your sign. They'll hear it, they'll think one thing, and you're going to take it as your sign because you'll have been under cover of the trees. The sound of your footsteps are going to be covered. That sounds like what's happening here. And so, sure enough, David did so just as the Lord had commanded, and struck down the Philistines from Geba as far as Gezer. So he does this sort of attack from the side or from the rear, and chases them back down. Um, Gezer is on a slightly different valley, a parallel valley, but he's chasing them back down that way, all the way. Notice they're headed all the way back down to the area of the Philistines. Now, in 1 Samuel, we had the birth of Samuel. 2 Samuel started with the death of Saul. 1 Samuel, we had Hannah's song of thanksgiving right in the beginning, right after the birth of Samuel. In 2 Samuel, we had David's song of the bow after the death of Saul. In 1 Samuel, we had where Samuel hears God, and we've been noticing that David is listening to the Lord. 1 Samuel, we have war with the Philistines, which ends in failure. Remember the loss of the ark, and here the war of the Philistines meets with success. But in both cases, we're going to see the travels of the Ark of the Covenant. In First Samuel, it was because the ark had been captured. It's not now that the ark has been captured, but David is going to find a home, a new home for the Ark of the Covenant. And so the Ark of the Covenant, which represented the throne of God, this was a box, a wooden box, overlaid in gold, and it had a surface of solid gold. And notice the statues of two cherubim, these two mighty angels with their wings overshadowing it. And it wasn't about the cherubim. The cherubim were merely to serve as honor guards for the Lord. This signified the presence of God. And in the past, the Israelites had tried to sort of maneuver it and maybe take it into battle, thinking they'd force God to fight for them. David hasn't done anything like that. Instead, he's going to bring it home to seek to have a regular home where the center of Israel will be. There will be God as well. And so, chapter 6, verse 3, they placed the ark of God on a new cart. And you say, why did they use a cart? Well, that's how the Philistines had placed it when the Philistines had captured the ark, and they'd kept it for a number of months, but then all sorts of bad things had happened. We saw that back in First Samuel. And then they had put it on an ark and sent it home with two oxen. Um, well, now they take it, and that cart was probably old. That had been a few generations back. And so they get a new cart now that they might bring it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, he's the priest, the high priest, they were leading the new cart. But when they came to the threshing floor of Nakon, Uzzah reached out toward the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen nearly upset it. Carrying it on a cart was a little iffy, and he didn't want to see it tumbling down the hill. And he reaches out, and he is killed for touching the ark. And the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and the Lord struck him down there for his irreverence. Now, the idea is for his action, his casual action, and he died there by the ark of God. That was serious stuff. And David became angry because of the Lord's, and notice that term outburst, that was Perez again. Um, the Lord's outburst against Uzzah, and the place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. So there's a few different places with that name Perez in it. Sometimes for God outbursting against the enemies of God's people, and sometimes, like in this case, for outbursting against one of the priests. And David was unwilling to move the ark of the Lord into the city of David with him, but David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. Thus the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months. You say, what's a Gittite? It might be somebody from Gath. Was this like a Philistine who was living among God's people? Maybe. Or maybe something else. But it's there for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. Now it was told King David, saying, the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom, all that belongs to him, on account of the ark of God. And so David takes this as a good sign, and he went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. And so we read that David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. Now that's sort of casual dress. He's not wearing royal garments. He's not wearing these things that make him look kingly. He's dressed rather simply before all the people as he's dancing before the Lord. Then it happened as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David that Michal, we haven't talked much about Michal, we mentioned her in passing. She was the daughter of Saul, and she looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. She was the son of the previous king, King Saul, and she had fallen head over heels in love with David at an earlier date, but now she looks at him and he just doesn't look quite so kingly. And she looks at that and she says, yuck, my father held it so much better. But when David returned to bless his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how the king of Israel distinguished himself today. Now, this is sarcastic. You had to hear it in the tone. And I think we can understand that from the context. He uncovered himself today in the eyes of his servants' maids as one of the foolish ones shamefully uncovers himself. He's not dressed up like he should have been. So David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord." I'm not going to act kingly because God is the real king. I'm I'm just one of us common folk. It was the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore, I will celebrate before the Lord. I'm going to bow down before the Lord. I will be more lightly esteemed than this and will be humble in my own eyes. But with the maids of whom you've spoken, with them I will be distinguished. I'm not worried about my status. I'm fine. But before the Lord, I'm going to humble myself. I'm not going to act kingly before the Lord. And then we read, Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. Now, that's the last we're going to hear about Michal. Um, so no children, that was considered for a woman a sign of dishonor. And so she was worried about the honor of the kingship, and yet she is the one who goes away in dishonor after this. So the ark comes to Jerusalem. That's chapter 6. Next, in chapter 6, verse 20, we saw Michal showing disdain while David shows his joy in the Lord. And now, as we come to chapter 7, God makes a covenant with David. Now, David has got this idea, and he goes to the prophet, and he says, I'm going to build a house for the Lord. And the prophet says, hey, that's cool, that's great. But then God shows up and says, no, you're not going to do that. Nothing against you. In fact, you've pleased me. Instead, I'm going to build a house for David. And so we have the plans for two houses. A house will eventually be built for the Lord, but not by David. It will be built by David's sons. David will make the preparations for it, but he won't actually build it. And God is entering into a covenant. Now, the word covenant is not going to be used here, but it's used elsewhere to describe what God had done with David. So we're going to read about, for example, in the Psalms, that God is going to say, I've made a covenant with David. So the covenant idea is here, but the actual word is not going to be used. Chapter 7, verse 12, when your days, this is God speaking, when your days are complete and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant, literally your seed, after you. Remember the promise of the seed that we saw going all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Your descendant after you who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So the promise here is that David is going to have an eternal kingdom. We continue. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of the sons of men. But my loving kindness shall not depart from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. So Saul had a kingship, but he lost it. God says, I'm going to make your son king, and he's not going to lose it. The kingdom will last forever. Now, it doesn't say there's not going to ever be any downturns. We're going to see that. But and so yes, if he acts wrong, I'm going to punish him. Your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. And then we have a summary statement in accordance with all these words, all this vision. So Nathan, that's the prophet, spoke to David. After the covenant is made, and by the way, that covenant, I think it still stands today. There is still a descendant of David. You say, well, who is that? I haven't heard about any kings over in Israel. No, it's Jesus. He's the final seed of David, the final covenant of David that continues into all eternity. So now we are going to read about the wars of David, starting in chapter 8, where you have the Philistines, you have Moab, you have Aram, and you have Edom all lined up, and each one is taken out. Each one is subjugated by David. In chapter 9, we go from wars to David now as he enters a period of peace. He has a desire to show kindness to the house of Jonathan. And so he asks, is anyone left? And he is informed by Ziba, who had been the steward of Saul, that there is somebody by the name of Mephibosheth. And so David meets with this young man. And now we're told at the beginning and we're told again at the end, sort of as bookends, that Mephibosheth was lame in both of his feet. We find out elsewhere how that had taken place, but it's just the mention is made that he has been lame, and he's really been that way for a very long time. It's not that he's old and decrepit; it's that he was, we find out elsewhere that he was dropped as a child, and that led to his walking problems. And so David meets Mephibosheth, and he promises that that Mephibosheth will be taken care of. Everything that belongs to Saul is returned to him, and he gives instructions to Ziba, the steward. Now, there's a little undercurrent here because if there were no descendants of Saul, then Ziba, as the chief steward, it would fall to him. But because there is a descendant, Ziba's out and Mephibosheth is in. And just remember that because we're going to see next time when we get to the later chapters of 2 Samuel how that plays out. But instructions to Ziba, you and your sons are going to continue as stewards, and Mephibosheth will be the beneficiary, although he's going to be honored to the point as if he was one of my own sons. And so he gets to come and eat at my table, the position of royalty. And so David again shows this kindness to Mephibosheth. You are always welcome in my home at my table. Chapter 10, verse 1. Now it happened afterwards that the king of the Ammonites died. Remember, Ammon had been subjugated, but notice apparently they had come to terms. And Hanun, his son, became king in his place. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. They'd come to terms. And so he sends some delegates to bring gifts to this new king, and honor is shown in the previous chapter to Mephibosheth, the grandson of Saul, and David now seeks to show honor. And back then it had been that I may show him kindness, and now he seeks to show honor, but instead those servants are treated as though they are spies. They are taken, half their beards are cut off. Like, I'm not sure if, exactly how that looks like, maybe the right side or the left side, something, but it's a sign of their shame. They're treated shamefully, and they're returned back. And he had said, I'll show kindness to them, but instead they're treated in this very rough way. And they come back, and David says, well, you guys sort of go into seclusion until your beard grows back. I guess they took that rather seriously. I'm not bearded, so I don't have much of a beard. I'm usually smooth shaven, but they weren't. They didn't practice that back then. And now he seeks to punish for this dishonor that has been shown his representatives. And so, verse 6, now when the sons of Ammon saw that they had become odious to David, the sons of Ammon sent and hired the Arameans of Beth Rehob and the Arameans of Zobah. Notice people from Aram could be from a number of different locations. Aram wasn't a single country, but a very wide area. And so they are able to hire, notice, 20,000 foot soldiers, and the king of Maacah with 1,000 men, and the men of Tob with 12,000 men. They've got a high number of mercenaries that are going to come against David and against Israel. And so you've got the Arameans of Bethrob, the Arameans of Zobah, plus these other groups, the king of Maacah, the men of Tob. And when Joab saw that the battle was set against him in front and in the rear, because they're coming from all sorts of directions, he selected Joab, remember, that's the general, and that's David's general, his chief of staff general. He selected from all the choice men of Israel and arrayed them against the Arameans. So Joab is the commander here. But the remainder of the people he placed in the hands of Abishai, his brother. Now, he initially had two brothers, but one of those died at the hands of Abner. And so Abishai's brother, and he arrayed them against the sons of Ammon. He said, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you shall halt me. But if the sons of Ammon are too strong for you, then I will come to help you. So he's got one army against the Aramean forces, the mercenary forces, another force under Abishai to face the people of the soldiers of Ammon. Um, Notice at verse 12, sounds like something right out of the book of Joshua. Be strong and let us show ourselves courageous. Yeah, I've heard those lines before. For the sake of our people and for the cities of our God, and may the Lord do what is good in his sight. And so they're trusting in the Lord. Again, this is all, I think you're supposed to hear this each and every time. And they go into battle, but with a plan, in effect. And so Joab and the people who were with him drew near to the battle against the Arameans, and they fled. Aram flees before him. That's the mercenaries. When the sons of Ammon saw that the Arameans fled, they also fled before Abishai. Otherwise, they might have actually overcome, but there is a victory in morale, and they entered the city, and then Joab returned from fighting against the sons of Ammon and came to Jerusalem. So it's a victory, not that all the forces are destroyed, but they're all sent packing, and there is peace for a brief time. Chapter 10, verse 15. And then when the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, now they had just come as mercenaries before, they were just in pay, but they gathered themselves together, they regroup, and they're going to come back with their own reinforcements. And Hadadezer sent and brought out the Arameans who were beyond the river. See up there in the north, I've listed that Aram Naharim. That's the technical title. Today we call it Mesopotamia. They called it back then Aram between the rivers. That's what Naharim means. So Aram between the rivers, and they gather these folks, a number of groups of Aramaic folks, and they came to Helam, and Shobach, the commander of the army of Hadadezer, led them. And this time it's a very big group. But the Arameans fled before Israel, and David killed 700 charioteers. That's the highest group of military weaponry that you could find. The chariots, that was the weapon of warfare of the most modern nations. So 700 charioteers of the Arameans and 40,000 horsemen. That's a lot. And struck down Shobach, the commander of their army, and he died there. When all the king's servants of Hadadezer saw that they were defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and served them. So the Arameans feared to help the sons of Ammon anymore, and peace finally comes. A lasting peace, at least for right now, comes to the land. The next time we see warfare, it won't come from without, it's going to come from within. Well, we will see a few issues. So we have a military victory. But on the heels of that military victory, David now is going to see a moral defeat, and that's going to be introduced in the next chapter. And there's a reminder here. It's a reminder of something we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. And then the passage goes on, no temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. But you have to take heed. You have to actually take that way of escape. And David, who had faced attacks from without, is now going to face not a military attack, but a moral attack from within. And he's going to fail, and he's going to fail big time. But we'll see that. We'll see that next time.